The evening sun poured a warm glow through the tall windows of the concert hall, filling the place with a quiet kind of excitement. People dressed in their best clothes found their seats, whispering to each other about the performance everyone had been waiting for. The pianist was famous not just for his incredible skill, but also for his charm and confidence. He had performed all around the world, and tonight his fingers were ready to make the piano sing once again. When he walked onto the stage, the crowd cheered loudly. He smiled, waved lightly, and took his seat at the grand piano. For a moment he closed his eyes, letting the silence stretch before the first note touched the air. The music began soft, almost like a whisper, then slowly grew into something powerful. Every note filled the room, bouncing off the walls, wrapping the audience in sound and emotion. People were completely still, afraid to even breathe too loudly. When he finished, the hall erupted in applause. Some people stood clapping and shouting his name, while others just smiled, too moved to speak. The pianist stood, bowed deeply, and then, with a half-smile, asked if anyone from the audience wanted to try playing. Usually this was a fun little moment. Someone brave would come up, play a few wrong notes, and everyone would laugh kindly. This time, though, something unexpected happened. From the back of the hall, a small hand rose in the air. A young girl, maybe around 16 or 17, stood up slowly. She held on to her mother's arm as they walked toward the stage. People watched, whispering softly. The girl's steps were careful, her hand sliding lightly along the edge of the seats as she moved. That's when many in the audience noticed. She was blind. The pianist noticed it too, but he didn't quite know how to react. He raised an eyebrow and smiled in a slightly teasing way. When she reached the stairs to the stage, she stumbled for a second and he let out a little laugh, saying something like, "Careful now, the piano can be dangerous." The audience chuckled lightly, thinking it was harmless fun, but her mother's face turned pale. The girl, however, didn't say anything. She just smiled politely as if she didn't mind at all. But deep inside, her heart hurt a little. The pianist, still amused, asked her gently, "So you want to play for us?" His tone carried a hint of disbelief, as if he thought she might just press a few keys and leave. The girl nodded calmly. Her mother tried to speak, maybe to stop her, but the girl whispered something softly and her mother stepped back, trusting her. The hall fell quiet again. Even the air seemed to still. The pianist stepped aside, his arms crossed loosely, watching her with curiosity. She slowly moved toward the piano, her hands reaching out to find its smooth surface. The audience watched every movement she made. It was like time had slowed down. She ran her fingers gently along the edge of the keys, feeling them one by one, almost as if she was greeting old friends. Her touch was delicate, but there was something steady about it. Then she sat down carefully on the piano bench. Her posture straightened, her head tilted slightly as if she was listening to something only she could hear. For a moment, nobody spoke. Even the pianist, usually full of confidence, felt something strange, a mix of curiosity and uncertainty. The girl took a deep breath. Her hands hovered over the keys for a second before she pressed the first note. The sound was soft and low, but there was emotion in it, like the quiet cry of a memory. Then came another note and another, each one falling into place like raindrops in a rhythm. The audience went still. No one moved. The pianist's smirk faded. His eyes widened slightly. What they were hearing was not random playing. It was music, real music. The melody began to grow, filling the room with warmth and sadness at the same time. The girl's fingers danced across the piano with grace, finding every note with a natural instinct that didn't seem possible for someone who couldn't see. Her body swayed gently with the rhythm. Every sound she made felt alive, like it carried a story too deep for words. People in the crowd leaned forward in their seats. Some of them had tears in their eyes without even realizing it. The music was beautiful, but it was more than that. It was honest. Every note spoke of something real, something human. The pianist stood frozen beside her, watching the way her fingers moved, listening to how effortlessly she commanded the piano. He had played thousands of times before, but this was different. This was pure feeling. She didn't need to see the keys. She could feel the music through her skin, through the air, through her heartbeat. The hall was so silent that the soft sound of her fingers touching the keys seemed louder than anything else. Even the smallest mistake would have echoed, but there were none. Every tone was clear and perfect. As she played, the pianist began to remember something he hadn't felt in a long time. Why he started playing in the first place. Not for fame, not for applause, but for the love of music itself. Somewhere along the way, he had lost that feeling. But this girl with her calm smile and blind eyes was showing him what true music meant. The melody reached its highest point. It was powerful yet gentle, strong yet full of peace. It felt like sunlight breaking through clouds after a long storm. The girl's hands moved faster, but her face stayed peaceful. She wasn't just playing notes, she was telling a story, one that only her heart understood. When she finally pressed the last note, it hung in the air, trembling softly before fading into silence. The hall was utterly still. No one clapped right away. It was as if everyone had forgotten how to move or speak. Even the pianist, who was used to endless applause, didn't say a word. He just stood there looking at her in awe. The girl slowly lifted her hands from the keys, her fingers trembling slightly. Then she turned her head toward the pianist as if she could feel his gaze. A small smile touched her lips. "Music doesn't need eyes," she said quietly. Her voice was soft but clear. "It only needs heart." Her words hit him like a wave. He swallowed hard, not knowing what to say. The audience finally came back to life, and then the applause came, loud, strong, and endless. People stood up, clapping with tears in their eyes. Some even shouted her name, overwhelmed by what they had just witnessed. The pianist walked closer, still speechless. He looked at her with deep respect, realizing how wrong he had been to underestimate her. Gently, he placed his hand over hers. "You've taught me something tonight," he said softly. She smiled again, and though she couldn't see it, he bowed his head in gratitude. Her mother stood at the side of the stage, crying quietly but smiling with pride. The girl reached out, found her mother's hand, and together they walked off the stage. The audience continued clapping even after they had gone, moved beyond words. The pianist sat back down at the piano, staring at the keys for a long moment. He touched them, but he didn't play. For the first time, he felt nervous, not because of the crowd, but because he had just witnessed something far beyond skill. He realized that talent was not about how perfectly one could play, but how deeply one could make others feel. As the lights dimmed and the crowd slowly left, the pianist sat there in silence, thinking about the girl, her music, and the quiet strength she carried. He promised himself he would never forget that moment. And from that day on, every time he played, he remembered the blind girl who made the entire hall go silent. Not because she was blind, but because she could see music better than anyone else. The sound of that last note still echoed in the pianist's mind long after the concert was over. He sat alone in the empty hall, staring at the piano as if seeing it for the first time. The seats were empty, the lights dimmed, and yet the memory of her music lingered like a warm breath in the air. He gently pressed one of the keys, but even the perfect tone of the instrument sounded hollow now. He realized something had changed that night. Something inside him. He had always thought he understood music better than anyone else. To him it was a matter of skill, technique, and control. But the blind girl had shown him a truth that words couldn't explain. Her music had not come from practice or pride. It came from emotion, from something deep and honest. He wanted to understand that feeling. He wanted to feel music the way she did. The next morning, the city was bright and alive again, but he couldn't shake the image of her sitting at the piano, her eyes closed, her fingers moving like they were guided by something divine. He found himself walking the streets without a plan, his thoughts lost in the rhythm of passing sounds, the footsteps, the street noise, the wind. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about fame or performance. He was thinking about her music. A few days later, he called the event manager who had organized the concert and asked about the girl. The manager paused before saying, "She's quite known in the local community. She teaches music to children who have disabilities. Very talented, very humble." He gave him the contact details of the community center where she worked. That afternoon, he stood outside a small building on the quiet side of town. The sign on the door was simple. Inside, he could hear the sound of laughter and faint piano notes. He stepped in quietly. Children were sitting in a small circle, tapping their hands along with a gentle tune played on an old upright piano. And there she was, the same girl from that night sitting at the piano smiling as one of the children tried to follow along. He stood by the doorway for a long moment, watching. She didn't see him, of course, but she somehow sensed someone was there. Her fingers slowed on the keys, and she tilted her head slightly. "Is someone at the door?" she asked softly. He took a step forward. "It's me," he said gently. "From the concert." A quiet smile spread across her face. I remember your voice, she said. You came to listen again? He nodded even though she couldn't see it. Yes, I wanted to learn from you. If you'd let me. The room fell silent. The children looked up curiously, whispering among themselves. The girl smiled kindly. You want me to teach you? She asked, almost amused. He nodded again, smiling slightly at the irony. I want to understand how you play, how you feel the music. She thought for a moment before nodding. Then sit, she said, moving slightly aside to make room on the bench. He hesitated, then sat beside her. The piano was smaller than the one in the concert hall, but its keys were just as full of potential. She reached out and placed her hands over his, guiding them lightly. Don't look at the keys, she said. Close your eyes. He frowned a little, but he did as she said. The world around him went dark. He could hear the children breathing, the wind outside, the faint ticking of a clock somewhere in the room. Now, she whispered, press a key, slowly. He pressed one key, a low note that vibrated through the air. Feel that, she said. Don't just hear it. Feel how it moves inside you. He nodded quietly. They spent the next hour like that, playing simple notes, focusing on the sound, the vibration, the emotion behind each one. He had never played like this before. It was strange and beautiful at the same time. When the lesson ended, he sat in silence. The girl smiled softly and said, Music isn't about seeing. It's about trusting what you feel. He looked at her and realized that she truly lived by those words. He began to visit her more often after that. Every week he came to the small music center. Sometimes he would help the children with their lessons. Sometimes he would just listen. The girl never treated him like a famous pianist. To her, he was just another student learning to connect with his heart. The children adored him. They would laugh and tease him whenever he played too fast or missed a note, and he would laugh along, something he hadn't done in years. Slowly, the walls of pride and perfection he had built around himself began to fall away. One afternoon, as they were practicing, a little boy asked the girl, Teacher, why do you play with your eyes closed? She smiled gently. Because when I close my eyes, I can see better, she said. The pianist looked at her, understanding the deeper meaning behind those words. He began to notice how her world worked differently. She remembered every sound, every touch, every vibration, the way she knew which key she was on by the faint difference in texture, the way she recognized people by the tone of their voice or the way they breathed. It amazed him. But more than that, it humbled him. As the months passed, the two of them grew close, not in a romantic way, but in a shared respect and understanding. She would often ask him to play, and together they would create melodies that made even the children stop and listen. Their music was unplanned but beautiful, flowing naturally from one note to another. It was as if they could understand each other without speaking. One day she asked him, Do you miss the big stages? He paused for a moment before answering. I used to, he said, but now this feels more real. She smiled at that. The more he played with her, the more he realized how music connected people in ways nothing else could. There were no competitions, no judges, no spotlights, just pure emotion shared between hearts. He learned that the most powerful performances weren't always in front of thousands, but sometimes in small rooms, filled with genuine souls. One evening, he invited her to play at one of his future concerts. She hesitated at first, unsure if she could do it again in front of a big audience, but he insisted gently, saying, They need to hear your music. The world needs to feel what I felt that night. After much thought, she agreed. The night of the performance arrived. The same hall where everything had begun was packed once again. The audience whispered excitedly, not knowing what was about to happen. When the pianist walked on stage, the crowd cheered as usual. But this time, he didn't stand in the center alone. Beside him, the blind girl walked slowly with the help of her cane. The audience fell silent, recognizing her. Many remembered that night when she had played and left them speechless. The pianist smiled at her, then at the audience, and said, Tonight, the real star is not me. It's her. The applause started slowly, then grew louder, but the girl simply smiled and sat at the piano. He sat beside her. For a few seconds, there was only silence. Then she began to play. The music was soft at first, like a whisper. Then it grew, filling every corner of the hall. The pianist joined in, following her lead this time. Their notes intertwined perfectly, blending like two voices telling the same story. It was magical. People in the crowd closed their eyes, some crying quietly, others smiling through tears. The music carried something powerful: hope, forgiveness, and beauty. It was not about blindness or fame. It was about connection. When the last note faded, the hall was silent once again. Then came the applause, stronger, louder, longer than before. Everyone stood, cheering, some even shouting her name. The pianist looked at her, eyes shining. She turned her head toward him and whispered, "You finally played with your heart." He nodded, unable to speak. He knew she was right. After that night, they became known as a duo that brought soul into every performance. But beyond the fame and recognition, what mattered most to him was the lesson she had taught him: that true music wasn't about perfection, but about truth. And sometimes those who can't see with their eyes can see far deeper than anyone else, and so, the pianist who once teased a blind girl learned the most important lesson of his life, not from the applause of the crowd, but from the quiet grace of someone who showed him how to listen with his heart. After their performance together, everything changed for both of them. The video from that concert spread quickly. People all over the world watched it and couldn't stop talking about the blind girl who played with her heart and the famous pianist who learned from her. Reporters wanted interviews, magazines wanted their story, and people sent letters filled with admiration. But for the two of them, the attention didn't matter as much as the connection they had built through music. The pianist started to spend more time at the community center. He would go there early in the morning, long before the children arrived, and sit quietly at the piano, waiting for her. She would walk in with that same gentle smile, always carrying a small bag with her braille sheet music. They didn't talk much in the mornings. Instead, they just played. Sometimes she started, sometimes he did. But no matter who began, the other would always follow naturally. The music seemed to flow between them without effort. He noticed something beautiful about her way of playing. She never rushed, never tried to impress. Every key she touched had meaning. Every pause was filled with emotion. It made him realize how much he had missed in his own playing all those years. He had been chasing perfection, but she was chasing truth. One day, as they were practicing, he asked quietly, "How do you know what to play next if you can't see the notes?" She smiled and said, "I listen. Not to the sound, but to what it feels like. Every song has a heartbeat. If you follow that, you'll never get lost." Those words stayed with him. From that day on, he started to close his eyes when he played, trying to feel the music instead of reading it. It wasn't easy at first. He hit the wrong keys, lost rhythm, and sometimes laughed at his own mistakes. But she always encouraged him softly, saying, "It's not about getting it right. It's about feeling it right." Weeks passed, and the bond between them grew stronger. The children at the center loved watching them play together. The girl often let the kids touch the piano keys while she guided their hands, showing them how music could speak even when words failed. The pianist admired her patience and warmth. She never seemed tired or frustrated, no matter how long the lessons lasted. One afternoon, after the children had gone home, he asked her if she had always wanted to be a musician. She nodded and said, "When I was little, I could see a little bit. Not much, but enough to remember what colors looked like. My father used to play the piano at home. I would sit next to him and press the keys with him. When I lost my sight completely, I thought I'd lost everything. But then I realized the music was still there. I could still feel it even in the dark." Her words touched him deeply. He had never thought about how much courage it must have taken for her to keep playing, despite losing her sight. She didn't see it as a weakness, but as a different way of understanding the world. As the weeks turned into months, they began working on new compositions together. He would come up with melodies, and she would add layers of emotion that made them complete. They started recording their sessions not for fame, but to keep their memories alive. Their music was calm, emotional, and full of soul. Whenever they played, time seemed to disappear. One evening, while they were recording a new piece, the power suddenly went out. The room went completely dark. He let out a small laugh and said, "I guess we can't play without light." She smiled softly and replied, "Maybe you can't, but I can." He sat still for a moment, then closed his eyes. "Then show me how," he said. In the darkness, she began to play. Her fingers moved with confidence, each note clear and gentle. He followed her lead, his fingers finding the keys by sound and instinct. For the first time, he truly understood what she meant. In that darkness, the only thing that existed was music. They played for nearly an hour, lost in sound until the lights came back on. When they stopped, both of them laughed quietly. It was one of those rare moments that didn't need words. Their bond grew even stronger after that night. They were invited to perform together in different cities, and though she was shy about the attention, she always agreed because she trusted him. Each time they performed, the audience sat in silence, completely absorbed. There was something magical about the way their music connected. It wasn't just a performance, it was a conversation between two souls. During one of their travels, as they waited backstage, she said softly, "You've changed a lot since the first time I met you." He looked at her, smiling. "How so?" She turned her head slightly toward him and said, "Back then you played to be heard. Now you play to be felt." He laughed gently, but she was right. He had changed. Her presence had reminded him what music really meant. After the show that night, the audience gave them a standing ovation. People came backstage with tears in their eyes, thanking them for the experience. An old man said, "You reminded me of my late wife. She used to play the piano just like that." Another woman whispered, "Your music made me believe in kindness again." The pianist realized that what they were doing was more than just entertaining. It was healing hearts. Back at the community center, things continued as before. The children grew better with every lesson, and the music room was always filled with laughter. One afternoon, while he was helping a little boy learn scales, the girl quietly sat by the window listening to the rain. When he joined her, she said, "Do you ever wonder why some things happen the way they do?" He thought for a moment. "All the time," he said. She smiled faintly. "If you hadn't teased me that night, maybe we'd never have met." He looked down, a little embarrassed. "I'm still sorry for that," he said softly. She shook her head. "Don't be. Sometimes a mistake can turn into something beautiful." Her words stayed in his heart. He often thought about how life worked in mysterious ways, how one careless moment of arrogance had led him to the greatest lesson of his life. He no longer saw himself as the teacher. She had become his guide, not just in music but in life. Months later, they released their first joint album, recorded from their live performances and practice sessions. The title was simple, "In the Dark." It became a quiet success. People said it made them feel peace, like sunlight through a window after a storm. But for the pianist, it wasn't about sales or fame. It was about honoring the girl who had taught him how to see with his heart. As time passed, the pianist began teaching at the center full-time. He left behind the big concert halls and the busy city life. The sound of applause didn't matter to him anymore. What mattered was the laughter of children learning to play, the warmth of friendship, and the quiet moments when music filled the air. One evening, as the sun set behind the windows, he watched her play for the children one last song. Her hands moved softly and the melody was filled with peace. The room was glowing with golden light and everyone sat quietly listening. He realized then that the greatest music in the world wasn't the kind played on grand stages. It was the kind that touched hearts in simple rooms like this one. After the children left, she turned to him and said, "Do you know what makes music truly beautiful?" He looked at her and waited. She smiled and said, "It never belongs to one person. It belongs to everyone who feels it." He nodded, his heart full. That night, as they locked up the center and walked out together, he looked up at the stars and thought about how far they had come, from a moment of misunderstanding to a friendship that changed them both. He had learned that sometimes the most powerful lessons come from the people we least expect, and in the quiet night air, he could still hear the faint echo of her music, a reminder that even in darkness there is always a light waiting to be felt. The quiet life at the community center had become something precious to both of them. The children, the laughter, and the small piano room filled with music gave them peace. Each day began with soft melodies and ended with heartfelt lessons that went far beyond the piano keys. The pianist often thought about how different his life used to be, full of fame, travel, and applause. Now his joy came from the sound of a child hitting the right note for the first time, or from watching the blind girl smile when one of her students finally understood how to feel a song instead of just playing it. Their bond had grown deeper than either of them had expected. It wasn't romantic. It was something stronger, a connection built through kindness, understanding, and a shared love for music. People from around the city began visiting the center just to listen to their sessions. There was something healing about their music. It carried peace, hope, and honesty. One morning the pianist arrived early, as he often did. He found her sitting by the piano, her fingers resting lightly on the keys, but she wasn't playing. She seemed lost in thought. He greeted her softly and she smiled, though her smile didn't reach her eyes that day. "You're early," she said. "Couldn't sleep," he replied, sitting beside her. "The music wouldn't leave my head," she laughed faintly. "That's what happens when the heart starts speaking louder than the mind." He nodded, but then asked gently, "Are you all right?" She hesitated before saying, "Just tired." "It's been a long week," he didn't push her. Instead, he began to play a quiet tune, something gentle and soothing. She joined in after a moment, her fingers moving gracefully. Their notes blended, soft and full of emotion. It was as if they both understood that sometimes words weren't needed. When the song ended, she whispered, "Thank you." That helped. Over the next few days, he noticed she seemed more tired than usual. Her smile was still there, but it came slower, and her hands trembled slightly when she played. One afternoon, after the children had gone home, she admitted she hadn't been feeling well. "It's nothing serious," she said, brushing it off. But he could see the fatigue in her face. He offered to take her to a doctor, but she gently shook her head. "I'll be fine. I just need rest." Still, he couldn't shake the worry from his mind. She was strong, but something in her voice told him she was hiding her pain. He started handling more of the teaching so she could rest, but she refused to stay away completely. Even on her worst days, she showed up, her hands searching for the piano keys as if they were her lifeline. One evening, when the sky outside turned orange and gold, she asked him to play something she had written years ago. "I haven't played it in a long time," she said softly. He agreed and started reading the braille sheet she handed him. The melody was slow and full of longing. As he played, she began to hum along, her voice low and trembling but filled with emotion. By the time the song ended, her eyes were wet, though she tried to hide it. "That was beautiful," he said quietly. She smiled. "It's called Through the Silence. I wrote it when I first lost my sight. I wanted to remind myself that silence isn't empty. It's full of things waiting to be heard." Her words stayed with him long after that day. Over the next few weeks, she became weaker, and finally she agreed to see a doctor. The pianist went with her. When the results came, the doctor explained that her condition was serious, something she had known for a while but never talked about. She had an illness that was slowly taking her strength. It wasn't curable, only manageable. The pianist sat quietly as the words sank in. She reached out, touching his hand, and said calmly, "Please don't look at me with pity. I've lived a good life. Music gave me everything I needed." He squeezed her hand gently, fighting the lump in his throat. "You gave music meaning," he said. She smiled softly. "Then we're even." From that day on, things changed. The pianist refused to let her face it alone. He made sure she rested, ate properly, and only played when she had the energy. The children noticed too. They began to bring her flowers, little gifts, or drawings of pianos with smiling faces. The room was always full of love and warmth. One rainy afternoon, while they were sitting by the window listening to the sound of raindrops, she said, "Do you ever think about what happens when the music ends?" He looked at her, unsure how to answer. "Maybe it never really ends," he said. "Maybe it just changes form." She nodded. "That's how I like to think of it too." She closed her eyes and leaned back slightly, listening to the rain. He watched her quietly, realizing how much she had changed his life. She had given him peace, purpose, and a new way of seeing the world. He wished he could return the favor, but he knew she never wanted anything in return. All she ever wanted was to share the beauty she felt inside. Despite her illness, she continued teaching whenever she could. The pianist helped her more and more, and together they kept the music alive. One day she told him she wanted to record one last song. "Not for the world," she said, "just for us. A memory." He agreed immediately. They spent days composing it together. The melody was soft, full of light and sadness. It carried everything they had learned: love, pain, hope, and peace. When the day came to record, the room was quiet except for the sound of the piano. She played slowly, her hands moving with care. Halfway through, she looked toward him and said, "Play with me." He joined in, and their music filled the room. It was unlike anything they had ever played before. Every note felt like a goodbye and a thank you all at once. When the last note faded, she whispered, "Perfect." That night, she fell asleep with a peaceful smile on her face. The next morning, she didn't come to the center. The pianist went to check on her and learned she had passed away in her sleep. There were no signs of pain, just calm, as if she had simply followed the music to another place. The news spread quickly. The children cried, the staff mourned, and the pianist sat at the piano in silence for a long time. He placed his hands on the keys, but he couldn't play. Not that day. The silence felt heavy, almost sacred. A few days later, during her memorial, the pianist decided to honor her in the only way he knew how, through music. The hall was full of people whose lives she had touched. He sat at the piano, closed his eyes, and began to play the song they had recorded together, their final melody. As the notes filled the room, people wept quietly. The music carried everything she had been, her kindness, her strength, her light. When the song ended, the pianist whispered softly, "Thank you." He stood, placed his hand on the piano, and smiled through his tears. He realized then that she hadn't truly left. She was in every note, every sound, every heart she had touched. After the memorial, he returned to the community center. For a while it felt empty without her, but he kept teaching. He taught the children everything she had taught him. To listen with their hearts, to feel the music, and to find beauty even in silence. The piano became a symbol of her spirit, a reminder that true music never fades. One evening, as the sun set and the children left, he sat alone at the piano. He played the melody they had written together, this time without sadness. He played with gratitude. As he finished, he could almost feel her beside him smiling. He whispered, "The music never ends." Outside, the sky was painted in soft orange light, and for a moment the world felt still. The sound of his last note lingered in the air, gentle and full of peace. Somewhere he knew she could hear it, and she was smiling, proud that the music they had created together was still alive in the hearts of those who listened. Years had passed since the day she left the world, but her presence still lived inside the walls of the community center. The piano she loved so much remained in the same place, polished and cared for by the pianist who still came every day to teach. The sound of laughter and music filled the air again, but something deeper now rested in every song they played. Her spirit had become the heartbeat of that place. He often found himself talking to her in silence while playing. Whenever a student made a mistake, he would smile and hear her gentle voice in his mind, reminding him to be patient. When a child played a melody with heart, he could almost feel her clapping along. It was as if she never truly left. The community center had grown over the years. What started as a small group of children learning to play had turned into a place where people of all ages came to find peace through music. There were new instruments, new faces, and even a small concert hall built in her memory. At the front of the hall stood a simple plaque that read, "Through the silence, she taught the world to listen." Every time he read those words, the pianist felt both pride and sadness. He missed her deeply, but he knew she would have wanted the music to go on. So he played, every day for her and for those who came to listen. One morning, as he was preparing for his class, a young girl came into the hall. She was quiet, maybe 10 years old, holding a white cane. Her mother walked beside her, introducing her softly. "She's been blind since birth," her mother said, "but she's been drawn to music since she could walk. We heard about this place, and about you." The pianist looked at the girl and felt something stir inside him, a familiar warmth, a memory. He smiled gently and knelt beside her. "Do you like the piano?" he asked. The girl nodded shyly. "I like how it feels," she said. "When it plays, I can see colors in my mind." He was moved. The way she described sound reminded him so much of the woman who had once changed his life. "Then let's make some colors together," he said softly. From that day, the little girl became his student. Her name wasn't important. What mattered was the way she connected with the music. She learned fast, faster than anyone he had taught before. Her touch on the keys was gentle but full of life. Whenever she played, it was as if she could see things others couldn't. The pianist often shared stories of the woman who had once inspired the school. He told them how she taught him that music wasn't about sight but about feeling. The children loved those stories, and the blind girl especially listened closely every time. One day she asked, "Will I ever be as good as her?" He paused before answering, then smiled. "You already are in your own way," she used to say. "Every soul has its own song. You just have to find yours." The blind girl worked hard, and soon she began performing at small gatherings in the center. People were amazed at her gift. They said her music carried something rare, a kind of magic that touched hearts. The pianist watched proudly, often with tears in his eyes. It was as though history was repeating itself. But this time he was the teacher passing on the lesson he had once been given. One afternoon, after a long session, the girl asked him, "Do you ever miss her?" The question caught him off guard, but he nodded slowly. "Every day," he said, "but I also feel like she never left. She's here, in this room, in the piano, in the music we make." The girl smiled. "Then maybe she's listening right now." Her words made him smile too. He sat at the piano and began to play a familiar tune, the one they had composed together all those years ago, the last one she ever played. The girl joined in, her small hands finding the right notes with ease. The melody filled the room, soft and emotional. When it ended, the girl whispered, "It feels like a dream." He looked at her and said, "It's not a dream. It's her gift, and now it's yours too." As the years went by, the girl grew into a young woman. Her music became known beyond the walls of the center. People invited her to perform in concerts, and audiences were left speechless every time she played. Her blindness never stopped her. If anything, it made her music more powerful. She played with her soul, just like the woman before her. The pianist grew older, his hair turning gray, but his heart stayed light. Watching her succeed gave him peace. One day she came to him and said, "They've asked me to perform in the city concert hall. It's a big stage and they want me to play a piece that means something personal. I want to play the one you taught me, the one she wrote." His eyes filled with emotion. "She would be so proud," he said. "And so am I." The night of the concert arrived. The hall was packed, filled with people from all walks of life. The pianist sat in the audience, his hands trembling slightly with anticipation. When the lights dimmed and she walked onto the stage, a quiet hush fell over the room. She moved gracefully, guided by her inner sense of space, and sat at the piano. When she began to play, the hall fell completely silent, just as it had so many years ago when the blind woman had once sat at the same kind of piano. The melody of "Through the Silence" filled the air again, but this time it carried two stories, the past and the present, woven together in harmony. Every note shimmered with emotion. Every pause breathed life. People closed their eyes and listened, many with tears running down their faces. The pianist sat motionless, his heart pounding. It was as if time had folded on itself, bringing the spirit of his old friend back to life through the hands of this young musician. When the final note faded, there was a long silence before the crowd rose to their feet in thunderous applause. But the girl didn't smile right away. She stayed still, hands on the piano, as if listening to something beyond the noise. Then she whispered, almost to herself, "Thank you." Later, backstage, the pianist went to her. She was holding the piano key pendant he had given her months ago, one that once belonged to the woman. "Did you hear her?" she asked softly. He nodded, his voice breaking. "I did, and so did everyone else," she smiled, her eyes glistening. "Then she's happy." After that night, the girl's career blossomed. She traveled to many places, sharing her music and her story. But no matter how far she went, she always came back to the community center. She said that was where her heart truly belonged. The pianist eventually retired, leaving the center in her care. It felt right. The music had come full circle. On his last day, he sat at the old piano, the same one that had witnessed everything: the teasing, the lessons, the love, the loss, and the rebirth of music. He played the song one final time, slow and tender, and when he finished, he smiled. He looked around the room, filled with laughter and music, and whispered, "You did it. You kept the promise." He could almost hear her soft laughter in the background, carried by the wind that slipped through the open window. As the sun set outside, painting the sky in gold and pink, the pianist stood up, leaving the piano behind. The young woman took his place and began to play, her fingers dancing across the keys with confidence and grace. The melody rose once more, filling every corner of the room. Outside, people walking by stopped to listen, drawn in by the sound. They didn't know the full story behind it, but they felt something pure, something human. It was a story told not with words, but with music, born from kindness, courage, and connection. And so the legacy continued, one heart passing the song to another. The pianist walked away that evening knowing that music, like love, never truly dies. It only finds new hands, new hearts, and new stories to tell. As the night deepened, the sound of the piano drifted into the distance. calm, warm, and eternal. Somewhere, perhaps in a place beyond words, the blind woman smiled, knowing that her melody still lived on, carried by those who believed in the power of music to heal, to unite, and to speak when words cannot. Years passed quietly, like the gentle notes of a familiar melody fading softly but never forgotten. The pianist now lived a calm life away from the spotlight. His hair had turned white, his steps slower, but his heart still beat in rhythm with every sound of the piano. Music had never left him. It was in his mornings, in the way he brewed his tea, in the laughter of the children who played outside the community center, and in the silence of the evenings when he would sit by the window and listen to the wind. He often thought about how his life had changed since that first day when he teased a blind girl out of arrogance. Back then he had been proud, untouchable, and lost in his own world. But that girl, with her quiet strength and her gift of hearing what others could not see, had changed everything. She had taught him that music was not about perfection or fame. It was about truth. It was about feeling. The community center had become a place of hope, not just for musicians but for anyone searching for peace. The young blind woman he had once taught was now its heart and soul. She had grown into a teacher, a performer, and a light for everyone who came through those doors. He watched from afar, proud and grateful. She often came to visit him, bringing stories of her students and how the piano room was always full. Every time she spoke, he could hear the same gentle passion in her voice that he once heard long ago. One afternoon, she came to see him as the sun poured golden light through the window. She carried her small keyboard with her, one that had traveled with her on many stages. She placed it on the table and said, "I wanted to play something for you." He smiled. "You've played for the world. Why for me?" She laughed softly. "Because you were the first to believe in me." She began to play, her fingers gliding over the keys with grace. The tune was familiar, the song that had once connected them all, through the silence. But this version was softer, deeper, filled with the weight of years and memories. As she played, the old pianist closed his eyes. He saw flashes in his mind, the first time he had mocked that blind girl, the moment he realized her gift, the laughter of children learning to play, and the day the hall had gone silent as she touched the keys. When she finished, she sat quietly for a moment before saying, "Do you think she would be proud of us?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood up, his voice gentle. "She already is. She's been proud of you since the day you touched the piano for the first time." The room was quiet for a while. Then the young woman said softly, "You know, sometimes when I play, I can feel her near me. It's like she's still teaching, still listening." The pianist nodded. "That's because music doesn't die. It lives inside the people who keep believing in it." They sat together for hours that day, sharing stories and laughter. Before leaving, she asked, "Will you come to the anniversary concert next week?" "It's in her honor." He smiled faintly. "Of course. I wouldn't miss it." When the day came, the hall was filled beyond capacity. The walls were covered with photos, some of the blind woman who started it all, some of the pianist teaching, and some of the young musicians who had grown up under their care. The air was full of warmth and love. The pianist took his seat in the front row, his heart full of pride. When the lights dimmed, the young woman walked to the stage. She stood by the grand piano and placed her hands on it gently, like greeting an old friend. Then she turned toward the audience and said softly, "This concert is for the woman who taught us that silence has music, and for the man who taught us that love can be heard through sound." The audience clapped, and the pianist felt tears well up in his eyes. She began to play. Her performance was unlike any other, calm, powerful, full of emotion. It wasn't just a performance. It was a conversation between the living and the memory of those who had passed. Each note seemed to speak of gratitude, of loss, of beauty. As she played, the pianist closed his eyes again. He could almost feel the presence of the blind woman beside him, her soft voice whispering, "See?" The music never ends. When the final note faded, the hall remained silent. It wasn't the silence of emptiness, but of reverence. Then slowly, people rose to their feet and applauded. The pianist stood, clapping with trembling hands, his heart too full for words. After the concert, she came to him. He hugged her tightly and said, "You've kept the promise better than I ever could." She smiled, her eyes shining. "No," she said. "We kept it together." That night, after returning home, the pianist sat by his piano one last time. He ran his fingers gently over the keys, feeling the cool surface beneath his skin. The room was quiet, but in that silence he heard everything. Laughter, applause, the voice of his old friend, the sound of hope. He began to play softly, just a simple melody. His hands were slower now, but his touch still carried meaning. As he played, he whispered, "Thank you. For everything." The notes drifted into the air, filling the room with a soft glow of memory. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair, a small, peaceful smile on his face. The next morning, the young woman came to visit. The door was slightly open. Inside, she found him sitting by the piano, eyes closed, his hands resting on the keys. He looked calm, as if he were simply lost in a beautiful dream. There was no sadness in the room, only peace. On the piano, a small note was placed, written in his neat handwriting. It said, "Keep playing. The world needs your music." Tears filled her eyes as she read it, but she smiled through them. She sat at the piano beside him and began to play the same song they both loved, their song. The melody rose softly, wrapping around them like sunlight. In that moment, she knew that even though his hands would never touch the keys again, his music would never fade. Years went by, and the community center continued to grow. The young woman became known worldwide for her performances, but she always returned home to teach. The piano where it all began stayed in the same corner, polished and cared for, carrying the fingerprints of those who had played it before. People said that when the hall was empty and quiet, you could still hear faint notes drifting through the air, a soft melody, full of peace. One evening, many years later, she stood on that same stage, her hair streaked with gray but her smile still bright. The hall was once again full. She spoke into the microphone softly. "This song is dedicated to the two people who showed me that music is more than sound. It's life, it's love, it's forever." Then she began to play through the silence. The notes shimmered like light dancing through the hall. Children, parents, and elders listened, their hearts full. Outside, the night was calm and the stars seemed to twinkle in rhythm with the melody. When the final note faded, she looked up, her eyes closed, and whispered, "Can you hear it?" She could almost feel them both there, the blind woman and the pianist, smiling, listening, proud, and somewhere, perhaps in a place beyond time, the three of them were together again, sitting by a piano that never aged, playing a song that would never end, because true music, born from kindness and courage, never dies. It simply changes hand and keeps playing through the hearts that remember.